Hi, my name is Michael Olsen, and welcome to this on automated process testing, or shortened APT, for ClickLearn Attain. Now, with the ClickLearn Attain release, we have a new project type suited for automated process testing. Inside this project, we still have an area for all the recordings we want to have, and then we have a new area for the test flows that we need to define and execute. I want to start by showing you how to create a new test flow. And I want to create this based on a recording that Debbie has already done. This is the typical scenario that you will use a recording that has been used in a content project in ClickLearn, done by someone else, but now you want to use it for the quality assurance or the testing purposes that you want to execute. So I want to call this sample test flow, and I want to create it. Now, when we create a new test flow here, we will get a new, very nice user interface that will allow us graphically to define the flow for our test. And the first thing that I will do is that I will drag over a recording done by Debbie. So I can select this from the list of recordings that I have at hand. And I know this is the one, the customer engagement open account, that I want to use. When I open it, you can see the 3 steps that Debbie has recorded. So I can see that Debbie has clicked for the module accounts. Then she has selected an account, and then she clicked into the account name field. Now, this is where the first problem typically arises, because I know in this test that I want to be able to do a branching according to a value that is not part of the recording that Debbie did. And the neat thing about the APT module now in Attain is that we can easily solve that without having to go back and do a completely new recording. Now let's try and take a look at it. I know from this that what Debbie has done in customer engagement was the 3 steps: clicking on accounts. After that, she selected an account, and then she clicked in to the account name field. But what I'm really looking for the test here is to use a different value from this form. And in this case, it could be the number of employees on the account. Now, what I can do from within the recording that I have selected is that I can inject a screenshot. So if I drag in a screenshot here and put it at the very end, it will allow me to start the navigator. This is like using the ClickLearn recorder, but the only thing that we're going to record is the screen content on this particular point in time. And then I'll show you how we can utilize that within our branching. Now, when we record from the form, it's important that we know exactly where we're injecting it and what it is that we're looking for. And what you will find here once I take the screenshots is that it will capture everything it knows about this form. It will know the tabs, it will know the fields, all the actions on the toolbar, everything. And once we are done with the screenshot, it will return to ClickLearn Attain and allow us to process this further. So what I will do now is that I will save the changes. Now I have the recording added that Debbie did, but I've added a screenshot to it. This allows me now to go and say I want to branch on this. So I'll drag over the fork that we have on the right-hand side, and that can be done conditionally. This allows me to go left or right as a simple example, depending on something. This can either be a variable, which we will touch base on a bit later, but it can also be from a screenshot that we have done. Now, if I choose to create the branching from a screenshot, it will open up the screenshot selector. And as you can see, all the different elements from the screenshot will now be active, and I can use them as I see fit. So I will position myself on the number of employees and select it. From this particular point in the form, we can now choose what kind of value that we should use. It could be the text, it could be a data string, it could be the actual value that we have, which is not in any way formatted in this case, but just the numeric value 6,000. So I'll use that selection. Once we save the changes from this, we can now choose how they should be validated. I can say it's greater than or equal to, and I could type in that it should be greater than or equal to 5,000. Save the changes. Now, as you can see, the diagram now expands. It will highlight what it is that I'm validating, and I now have two ways to go according to if this is true or not. And this allows me to do something specifically if it's greater than or equal to 5,000, and do something else if it's not. Now, right now, I will just use an insertion function that will allow the flow to continue, but write it into the log. I will not add a condition to this because I have a condition on the branching already. So I'll save the changes, and I will do differently on the right-hand side. I want everything to stop if it's not greater than or equal to 5,000. And in this way, you have the ability to build up your flows easily, understandable, less technical than normally if you had to do programming, and basically prepare everything. Now, this is the first part of it. The second part of this comes afterwards, where we need to define what kind of data needs to be executed. If you don't know right now, you could choose to save this and come back later and do the second pass. So I'll just show you that. Now, what we are looking for when we do the testing, I can't remember what Debbie used in the first run, but let's just try and go back to the list of accounts here to see what's in the system. So I took the screenshot from this one here. We had a number of employees of 6,000. This one up here, that has a number of employees, which is, let's just see. In this case, it is 9,500. And if we try and find another account, let's try and take this one down here. We have a number of employees on this one here as well, and that is less than 5,000, so 4,300. Now, understanding the data will of course mean that I know that when it needs to open an account, it needs to select an account first. Then it will come into the form, then it can actually capture the number of employees. So let's try and see how this is done in APT. So I open up the sample test flow again. And if we go from the normal diagram mode here to the data mode down here, that will allow you to do everything that evolves around data. So the first thing is that we have the recording itself, and it has no data points assigned. So I can click on this and assign data points. This will open up the steps inside the recording. Now we can go down and choose the one where Debbie had selected the account, and we can basically check mark it to make it a data point. Now this data point is selecting from a grid of data, and every row on a grid has a number of columns. So we can narrow this down only to specifically look at the account name column. We can name the data points, so I'll just call it name, and we will save that. So now we have the data point in place. Now, secondly, we need to choose the data that we want the test to run on. So we can right-click on this one up here and go into the data table. Now, within the data table, we can create our first scenario, and we need to fill in, of course, what kind of account name that we want it to run for. And we can do multiple scenarios and, of course, specify a different account on that one. So let's just do this fairly quickly. So we will go in, we will open the account. We will go into the account name. Just wait for the system to react here. We will copy that and put it in here. So there we have the first one. So we can go back to this one here, and let's take our second account. And wait for that to show. Go into the account name field again. Copy the content of that one. And I'll just go out of this and go back to Attain and put the value in here. So now we will set up two scenarios. First time it needs to select this account. Second time it needs to select this account. Save it. So now we can see that we have two scenarios ready to run. And that's basically all that is required for the test flow to be ready. Now, the reason for doing automated process testing is, of course, that we can do an automated test of the flow. So instead of a user having to go every single time you get a new version of your customer engagement system and have to spend hours on testing and reporting that back, you can actually just start up your new version of the system. Go in, you can run it from out here if you want to, but I'm just going to open it up here and run it from inside the editor part here. So when we start and run the test, we can keep hands off and allow the test to run automatically. So if you can recall from the diagram, the first thing that it will do is that it will take Debbie's recording and it will go into executing finding the account, but based on the data that we put into APT. We'll just have to wait a little bit here. So now it will go and click on accounts. The list of accounts comes up, selects the one that we selected in our first scenario, comes into this form, and it clicks into the account name. And what Debbie didn't do after that, we have made sure of in our automated process testing. We take a screenshot in order to get the value number of employees. After that, in the diagram, it will go in and validate if that is greater than or equal to the 5,000 and branch left or right. And for the second scenario, it will rerun the same recording, but with different data points. So we'll just have to wait for the system to respond to that. Then it will basically start over again and do exactly what we're looking for. So now it will click on accounts. We will get the list of accounts again. And it will take the second one, or the third one, sorry, in this case. Go in, click on the field, get the screenshot so that we get a new value in number of employees. And then it will finalize the test. So even though this is a simple example, I hope you can see that it can be very complex. We can extend on this, use not one, but several recordings. We can reference other tests in the system. And once the test has completed, we will get a full log that tells us how it worked. So you can see that it has actually executed the open account. It is branching and finding that the number of employees is true, greater than or equal to 5,000. So the assert continue we did on the left-hand side has been executed. Then it will do the second scenario, and none of the conditions are met because the number of employees is less than the 5,000. And thereby it will stop the execution here. Now, everything we do in terms of running these test scripts, that will, of course, as shown here, provide a log for you. You can also go into the assets within the project. You can basically find the APT assets. Inside that, you will find for the sample test flow I just created and executed, that we have executed this on this date, and we can open it up, and we can even open up the separate individual scenarios that we executed. We can open up the log again, but this allows you to dig in to how the flow went when you did an execution on anything within the system. So here you can see how it went in on the first 4th copy sample and executed the flow and got the screenshot. So everything will be nicely logged in the system, allowing you to go back and verify that everything has tested successfully. Now, in automated process testing, this example was based on a new recording that I created. This is just to start from start to end, show you exactly how everything works. But let's try and look at some of the examples that I've prepared beforehand for this here. Now, the first one here is almost similar to the one that you just saw, but I extended a little bit on it. Here I've done the validation greater than or equal to 7,000, and I've also added something additionally on the left-hand side. One of the things that I've added is a variable. Now, for this purpose, it has to do with that I want to dig up the accounts. Then I want to get some kind of value from the screenshot. In this case, not the number of employees, but the phone number. And I want to type that into a legacy application that I have outside of the customer engagement system. So it's very important to understand that the automated process testing allows you to do testing across application boundaries. So you're not locked down to just one system. Finance and operations, business central, customer engagement. It could be any other kind of application that you want to include in this flow that you want to test. The way that I've set up this variable has simply been to create a new variable. I called it phone number, and then I went into the screenshots where I can use the same screenshot I did before for the number of employees, but in this case simply went in and picked out the phone number instead, selecting that and going down and picking what it is that I want to have, the value down here, and use the selection. In that way, I can define a variable and set its value according to anything that's part of the form. Now, within the legacy application, it will basically open up a completely different Windows application where I can type in a value. Now, what I've done here is I've defined a variable that is also part of the legacy test that I've included. So it's another test that I've included in the customer engagement test. Now, in this test, you can see that the very first thing I do is that I execute that it should basically start anything on my system. In this case, it's a legacy application that I know the path for and can simply just start it up. But it could also be that you should start up Microsoft Word or Excel or go to a specific URL on a web application, whatever is needed. It also means that you can do your own batch jobs for cleaning up your database or whatever is needed, boot up a system before the APT is executed. Secondly, it is actually using a variable, and this variable is just a phone number, but it has the same naming as in the other test. For the actual recording on the legacy application, you will find that what it's doing with the legacy application is that it's opening it up, then it's just going to an input field, typing in a value, and then clicking on the button Save. Now, for this case scenario here, we have actually assigned the variable on our data point. So when we set up the data point for this legacy application, you can see that I'm using an input value. Now, this input value will be taken from the data. So it has one scenario, and it's using the phone number as input value. That means that we can combine the Microsoft customer engagement with the legacy application and allow it to execute nicely between the two. Now, to finalize this, let's just end by looking into another example on Microsoft Business Central. So I have basically done 3 recordings. Now, the 3 recordings will start by doing an order header. Then in the second recording, it will add an order line. And in the third recording, it will save the order. This allows us to do a test. And in this test, we can actually do iterations. We can do fixed iterations, or we can do variable iterations. So the very simple example is that it will create an order header, then it will do 1 or more order lines. Now, the way that we've done that, if we just try and delete this, just to show you, is that we take the iterator into the order line. We call it lines, for example, and do it variable. So we have the ability to go in and tell what it needs to iterate. It could go back to a previous recording. In this case, I'm just staying on the same one because I want to do 1, 2, 5, or 10 order lines, depending on the scenarios that I do. Now, I'm not going to save this right now, so let me just close that and open it again. I want to show you the data behind this. So when you look into this test that we have, and we go into the data foundation, the data table, you will see that when I do multiple scenarios with iterations inside of it, I can now do one order for one particular customer number, which types in one line using that item number and that quantity. But on the second scenario, I have 2 order lines. And that means that we can differentiate what should be done and make sure to test all the scenarios you may have, in this example for a sales order, and control that. This is even without doing any kind of programming. So all of this, I hope, will give you a very good insight into how easy it is, how visually appealing it is to someone setting up test flows on any kind of system using ClickLearn Attain. So thank you very much for your time.